So our next agenda item is C, items from the commission. C1, revision of the Austin Land Development Code. And discussion and possible action regarding matters related to any proposed revisions to the Land Development Code. And Vice Chair Duncan?
Madam Chairman, I do have a brief presentation I'd like to make relating to this item. First of all, I'm going to compliment Mr. Hirsch for some of what he just said. I'm incorporating. The City Council the other day asked staff two questions which I felt were very important. They said, is the code draft simpler? And did you look at other cities and to see what it was looking at? And I feel like, and I wanted to make this statement today because it's a broad-based look at some of the things that affect Code Next. And I apologize for using Code Next 4 because after 5 years, I'm so stuck on using that phrase, but I think we all know what we're talking about, the LDC. First of all, I think it is important to understand what urbanists like to call the DNA of your community whenever you are going to approach it and regulate it in accordance with the plan. Let me make sure I've got the right one here. What I have done here, and I hear people always talking about what other cities are doing. And in this community, we hear about San Francisco reducing their parking or eliminating their parking. We hear about Minneapolis eliminating single family. And we hear about a lot of things. But just how does Austin compare with these other communities that we like to compare ourselves with so often? We like to use the phrase, we are weird. Well, we are different. In fact, surprisingly, and I think a lot of other people, and I would defer to my two colleagues who have planning degrees up here because they look a little bit more urbanist than I do. But Austin has some really unique features which I think are very positive, and we need to take advantage of them. Let me, first of all, just look right here. The cities that I have sort of taken that we hear more often are Minneapolis, Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, and Portland. The features that I think that make us different than this, we are the smallest metro area. We are the largest city, believe it or not, of any of those cities that we hear about. But a significant characteristic of Austin is that we constitute almost half of our entire metro area. No other city does that I know of, major city in the United States. And we have one of the lowest densities, which obviously feeds the idea that we can certainly take a look at density, which Code Next does. It's also interesting to see that all those cities up there are locked. I can't use the word landlocked, but two are waterlocked, Seattle and San Francisco, and two are city locked. Denver and Minneapolis are not going to grow at all. They're going to grow up, if at all. Just for the record, I threw in two other cities, not that we're comparable at all, but people always bring them up when you're talking about urban sprawl, and that's Phoenix and Houston. And surprisingly, those cities only constitute about a third of their metro area. Again, much, much less than we do. And you'll see in a minute why this is so important, because the more, the greater portion of your metro area you control, you have the land use control issue, and you can control your destiny where other cities cannot. Looking at a little bit more detail in Minneapolis, and I like to use that because not only is it quite Austin, they are considered very progressive when it comes to land use. And of course, our city manager just came from there, so he's certainly familiar with it. But in terms of Minneapolis, Austin is actually twice as big as a city. We're 1 million. They're less than 500,000. I mean, they don't come anywhere near our size in population. Surprisingly, Minneapolis only covers less than 60 square miles. We have 350. We're 6 times larger than Minneapolis in terms of size. But we are half their density. They are a very dense city, and they are the only way they have to do is to build vertically and not horizontally. The other thing I thought was interesting is that, let me show you on this one. I apologize for not having this printed out. I'll be glad. I looked at the cities surrounding it. Minneapolis is in virtually a city jungle. There are 218 cities in the, and actually I should point out that Minneapolis isn't even entitled to its name in the title. It's the Twin Cities. It has to share it with a city of almost equal size, St. Paul, which is over 350,000 population. But there are 218 cities. Surrounding Minneapolis are 22 cities of over 20,000. Comparing that, there are only 9 cities in our entire metro area that are over 20,000. So I'm building up to show you this is the urban form, the urban DNA, and why did it happen? How did we get that way? The bottom line, in Austin, the suburbs are neighborhoods, and Minneapolis, the suburbs are cities. And that is significant. We need, and that's a responsibility that we need to incorporate in our plans and in our regulations. But if you'll, how did Austin become such a suburb-rich metro core city? Well, I will tell you this: it was by design, not by accident. The 3 tools in our toolkit, if you want to call it that, our implementation toolkit, were annexations, agreements, and utility districts. But let me show you something here. Now, I don't know how closely you can see this, but this is an excellent map showing how Austin has grown by decades over the last 60 years. The red, which is the core of this, and actually it's ironically basically what Imagine Austin calls the core today. It is on the north Anderson Lane, on the south Ben White, the river on the west, and actually I think Springdale Road on the east. We didn't even go further than that. But anyhow, it's the core. I know this area real well because of that's the 1959 boundaries, and that's the year as a young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed UT student I crossed the I-35 bridge, and it had only been opened a year. So that is the Austin that I was introduced to, and that was, 60 years ago, all right? So what's happened since then? And incidentally, the population at that time was 186,000. In the 1960s, which gold, after I graduated, I stayed on staff and ironically worked on annexations. I always like to have, here's an annexation report, 1962, that I put together, which analyzed every piece of annexation in the city of Austin that year. They get really down to the details, but anyhow, it's not really bedside reading, but but in the 70s, which is the yellow on this map, a lot of growth, a lot of expansion. It's what I call the Armadillo Austin era. And then I came back in early 1980s, and the city council in the early 80s was really bent on expanding the city. And this basically, and incidentally, when I came back, we were exactly double in population, or triple. We actually were 350,000 then. And interestingly, that was 35 years ago. Now we've tripled again. We're at 1 million. So you can start to see the growth pattern, which is somewhat. If you look at this, you can't read these articles, but these were all 3 articles in the summer of 1985. Naji, you're getting here for the best part. I like this. This first picture over there, there's a little story behind it. That's a picture of our city council in Dripping Springs trying to convince the people in Dripping Springs that it's a wonderful experience to be a part of Austin. That's Johnny Trevino, who is one of my favorite former city council members. And holding the elevator umbrella is Jorge Carrasco, who was our city manager at the time. Also under that, you can't really see him, is Mark Rose. I was there, but I didn't rank high enough to be under the umbrella, so I was standing a few minutes away. But the key here is that this was, the article refers to our extending our ETJ all the way to Dripping Springs. Now, all we did was strip it down 290, a 500-foot strip, but that allowed us, that 2 miles of limited purpose annexation, to extend our ETJ 85 square miles. All of it was to control the aquifer, okay? Let me keep going on this. The other 2 articles were other directions. It's 26 miles going to the east, and then the article on the right side is 183. Ironically, we were going both up 183 to the northwest and also down 183 past Bergstrom. But what this is the emphasis put on the city councils in the early 80s on expanding our territorial jurisdiction for future land use controls and the importance of that. That was I got to compliment this. There's a little thing you can't read at the bottom on the second column. The planning director at the time was Norm Standifer, and his staff predicted the population in 2020. Now, this was in 1984, okay? He predicted in that article, 1985, I guess it was, that Travis County would be 1.2 million in 2020. Guess what Travis County's population was in 2020? 1.2 million. I have never seen a planner that accurate or that close. So I think Ryan Robinson came on staff, so that's probably why it was a good number. But anyhow, those are the little things you look for when you get older, that you were right on something. The next thing I'd like to point out is agreements. When we extended our limited purpose stripping along roads out toward Taylor, believe it or not, and out toward Elgin, and also down toward Dripping Springs, with all due regard, it pissed off a few cities out there because they thought that the big bad city is coming to them. So we had to go out and negotiate, and we negotiated distances, and it worked out. So everybody was happy campers. At least they said they were. The third part, and it's really important, and you had to be here to experience it, was MUDs. MUDs came about in the late 70s, early 80s, and basically what it was, Austin was going through a boom period. We had a lot of development opportunities, but Austin did not have the facilities, water, wastewater to extend to them. But what you didn't really want to happen, you didn't want them to have to create their own package plants, and you didn't want them to create their own cities, and you didn't want them to annex to Round Rock or Leander or who else out there. So MUDs actually, even though that they were highly criticized, I think personally became a positive tool. Fiscally, they were costly because the city had to absorb them at a future time and absorb some of the debt because the residents, the developers came out like bandits because they were able to pass the utility costs on in bonds and still pay development market rates. But that was fine. But some people don't realize the extent of how many, what portion of this city was actually developed as MUDs. I've got them listed out there, but there was a phenomenal number. There's 16 in 1985 surrounding the city, literally in every direction, that were developed as MUDs. Okay. Now, what I want to do here is to shift gears a little bit and say, well, what is a suburb? Okay. And I try to put this one together looking at several. Spacious residential areas surrounding denser urban centers, generally favored by residents seeking more privacy, less congestion, and a little bit of green, often symbolized by a detached single-family home with a backyard and a two-car garage. Okay? Now, let's take a look at a couple of observations on the suburbs. First of all, new urbanists certainly know what they are because the T3 and the transect is a critical link between the rural and urban of the transect. It's an important part. It's a part of the overall, and it's shown right here. It's a connective tissue somewhat, the T3. I love this because these are a lot of kids. They were asked, how do you define urban, rural, and suburbs? And it's kind of hard for you to see them up close, but it was their thoughts. And you see, for example, like lots of people when you're talking about downtown. You see pictures of them on their tricycles in the suburbs. But it's important to realize that there are things. But riding their bikes to school, playing in the streets, chasing squirrels, these are all things you can do in the suburbs that are less likely to occur in the more dense urban areas. Okay. The next one I want to share with you is I think, real important. And this is, no matter how you try to regulate people's activities, you have to look at their preferences. This is two surveys. The top survey, and incidentally, the top one is by the home builders, the NAHB, and the bottom one is by realtors, the NAR. But the top one basically says, and if you combine those two middle pylons, which are suburbs, that 85% of senior citizens, old farts like me, prefer to live in the suburbs. All right? I mean, that's where this is the home builders saying this is their surveys. Interestingly, 2/3 of baby boomers prefer suburbs. 2/3 also of gender income. And believe it or not, in this survey, even half of all millennials prefer to live suburbs. I mean, I think we sort of tend to think that the only place millennials want to live in Austin is where the action is downtown, but that's not totally true. Okay, they want to also. And on the realtor survey, I thought was interesting on the bottom is one of the only pylons that more people want to live than actually are there is in the suburbs. And if you look at that closely. But the survey is so personal taste, if you base it on the urban-rural type, the suburbs are important. So let me now go to, okay, what are other cities doing? Almost all zoning codes provide, preserve, and protect detached single-family suburbs, okay? I actually surveyed 13 cities, okay, and you give me a city, I'll look at it. And I analyzed the zoning codes in 13 cities. And I broke them up into what I considered exurban or rural, suburban, and urban. You can see the middle piece there, it's really from about a 6,000 to a half-acre lot. I consider pretty much what I'd call a suburban-type area. And the typical lot is a 10,000 square foot lot, all right? That's a quarter acre. That is it's in every city. And it is a popular suburban size. Okay. All except Code Next. All right. Code Next, we go from 1 acre, 43,560, to 5,000. And the 43,560 is really only 2 districts. It's an RR and a Lake Austin. I mean, it's not applied that much. So basically what we've got here, our districts stop at 5,000. We don't acknowledge, I call it the missing middle. Everybody has their own definition of missing middle. Some people call it housing type. Some people call it income. Some people call it whatever you want. But I call it, what the real missing middle in Austin is zoning. In fact, Code Next facilitates the demise of detached single-family homes, the very thing that every other city in this country has, and the very thing that every other person wants. We do not have it embedded in our code. I think that's a fundamental flaw that we need to address before we start getting down into the weeds and looking at line by line of the document, the 1,366 pages that's being thrown at this community to adopt in 60 days. I actually took the districts, put them here, and I want to show you, sort of close with this. This is the actual districts. Hold on a second, yeah. The first one is the 43,560. Actually, the top 2 on the left are the 43,560. So don't. The R1 is 2,500 minimum. The R2A, which is actually the district that's being applied primarily in the outlying suburbs, and the R2B and the R2C and the R3 are pretty much more in the inner city. But the R2A, I think, is an interesting one, and I wanted to. We give a lot of attention in Code Next to multifamily. I mean, we've got over 10 districts in multifamily. I mean, in fact, we're overloaded in that area. I mean, this graphic here, I want you to look at, because what I did, I took the lot I live on in the Oaks in northwest Austin. I live on a quarter-acre lot, which is a pretty standard lot out there, 100-foot wide and 120-foot deep. I could have an ADU in the backyard. I don't. My wife preferred a chicken coop, which is what we've got. Not that that's an option, but our house. Now, when I read what staff is saying is that in our area, you could do 2 lots, on properties, you can do 2 houses on a property. I looked at it and I said, well, that's not exactly true. We're not being honest and transparent. Because what you can also do in that district is to split my 100-foot wad into 4 lots, 4 25-foot lots, and put 4 townhouses, attached townhouses on it, each with an ADU in the back. Now, understand, I don't live in the transition zone, which has got everybody rattled in the central city. I live 10 blocks from the transition zone. This can happen in every lot that size anywhere in Austin. And I don't think that the citizens of the city know that right now. I don't think they know it at all. And I think we're being dishonest by not actually saying what's happening out there, because it's going to come back to bite us in the rear in a bad way. And I don't think we all want that. We're all trying to have a positive outcome on this. I'm not going to CodeNet, in my opinion, is an unwise, unwarranted assault on Austin suburbs. And if we don't wake up, like I said, the last thing we want to adopt it, because if you adopt it, you've grandfathered it, you've entitled it. And then I will tell you, when they realize what's happened, there are going to be a lot of politicians that are not going to get elected because people are going to realize what's happened. And that's unfortunate, because I think they're well-meaning, but nobody really just knows some of the implications of it. I am still looking at the 1,366 pages, quite frankly, and probably all of you ahead of me. All I'm going to say is CodeNet is simpler than what? The first thing I looked at, I went back and looked at the two documents that I think we need predicated, the Zucker report and the diagnosis that was done, which both were very good documents and did identify a lot of problems. I go back to a document I put together some time ago when I compared all other cities. CodeNet 3 incident was 1,388 pages, so I guess it is progress. We got rid of 22. Now we're at 1,366, which is a big move, but we're still 3 times bigger than any other city in the country, so I think we got a little ways to go. I also looked at, because I look at organization, I think that we could do a lot better in organizing it to make people understand how to use it better. This is something that is not just the average citizen. I think it's the developer that's going to be using in the future. I think that it's just a problematic organization. I actually had gone through it in CodeNet 3 I haven't done, and given some suggestions. And now I've got CodeNet 4 here. I don't want to discuss it tonight in detail, but I just think we could have done a lot better job in organizing. And let me qualify it. This is not really a criticism or indictment of the staff that's been trying to put this together, because like Mr. Hirsch said, they were given almost an impossible task. They were given a deadline that was it was ridiculous. And what we really got, and all they had time to do, anyhow, like I said, it's not staff's fault. It's the policy that was and directions that was given to them by our city council. I also, I will drop this because this, I think, is important. I had spent a lot of time, and some of you may or may not remember, some of you are new. I was an early advocate of ADUs. I felt like Austin is a latecomer in terms of really maxing out the ADUs. There's an opportunity there. And I think we had made a lot of progress in CodeNet 3. This is an analysis of all of the other cities that I'd looked at. Our current code allowed a 1,100 square foot, which, and interestingly, and CodeNet 3 had actually come up with a sliding scale, smaller lots, smaller units, which actually fit not only the provision of them, but also the compatibility and the affordability issues, which I thought were real important. Now, somebody got to staff, and CodeNet 4 takes it back to 1,100. And I think there's a lot of this type of shit that's, excuse me, I shouldn't have said that, that's buried in the code that is going to be oversight, okay? And that's what bothers me. I think that you need to look at it with a fine-tooth comb. That let me show you something here. Here is a great description of an ADU that I found. And if you look at what's in yellow, in every case, it basically says how valuable it is, but it also says, let me give you the words, because usually much smaller and less noticeable than the main building. Small housing units built in the garage, attic, basement, or backyard. More modest visual impact makes them an easier sell to change at first neighbors. Those are all characteristics of it, in addition to providing an affordable living unit in the inner city primarily. Okay, now, you can hardly see the ADU here. That's probably an exaggeration. This is one that was built in the Heritage neighborhood, actually right next door to our chief leader here. You recognize that?
Yes.
You didn't know I was going to put that in my show, did you? Which is actually bigger than the house. I mean, that's not good. I mean, people are going to drive by that and say, well, I don't want an ADU in my neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not good. And we need to do a better job. And we need to, okay, this one I'm just going to touch on because it's really not a big deal. But I think you all know that I have a certain affection for the Hill Country roadway ordinance. And I must have told staff 6 times when we were working on Code Next 3 that there was a problem because this particular segment, which is from Stewart Road to, I forgot what the other one was, for about 4 years has not even been in the city of Austin. It's in the city of Lakeway. And it really should probably come out of our code. But, I mean, this is what I call a scribbler's error. It's not going to really change the course of Austin anyway. But, you know, like when you tell somebody 5 years you got a scribbler's error and nothing happens, you wonder really how attentive it is to cleaning up what you got. And then I started thinking, well, maybe, probably being in Lakeway, they'll do a better job of enforcing it than we would anyhow, so why don't you just leave it there. Compatibility standards we don't need to talk about because they basically have gone with the wind. And plan unit development, I told you, I gave a document out that I criticized the document. I said we really need a better one. Quite frankly, I think that the plan unit development in Code X4 is worse than the one we got right now. It actually has some conflicting provisions. Very little attention was given, and it does need to be looked at. So we've got a long way to go, but I think hopefully together we'll be able to get there. And when the council has their document, I apologize for taking so long, but it was a short agenda tonight, so I figured that it was as good as any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Duncan and former, what was your title here? It said it in one of the articles, but former planning director, correct?
Land Development Services Director.
Land Development Services Director.
And president of the National Planning Association at one time, if I remember right.
I can't hear.
Oh, president of the National Planning Association?
Well, that's a long time ago. Yeah.
Well, you've had a long life.
Yeah, I've been around a long time.
So are there any other presentations or comments or anything under C1, revision of the Austin Land Development Code?
Will you send out that presentation for us? Yes. Mr. Duncan?
Will you send it out? I'll make sure he does.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll send a copy out.
Okay, and Commissioner Tatkow?
Just a quick comment. Thank you for the presentation and for the history lesson. I think just the comment I'd like to make is that the first couple rounds were pretty heavy in rhetoric of the code rewrite, and I just would ask that we try to stay away from generalizations in terms of what certain folks want and what's good for certain folks, because we have this juxtaposition of the need for affordability in our city and then the interests of long-term citizens. There's just so many interests to juggle, and so I think personally my priority is affordability, and I want to see our code make that a reality for folks so that we can have an Austin for everyone. So that's just my little pitch for us all to get along.
I agree 100% with you because affordability is important. I think that 99% of what I said is not going to really reduce the affordability factor, okay? Up until the recent round, I'm not sure that anything we had in the code was really going to produce it. I thought it was sort of a fictitious, hopefully we've, just by increasing entitlements does not produce affordability. Because actually I think it works in reverse. If you upzone everything, you are disincentivizing somebody to build cheaper. You follow what I'm saying? So you actually should reduce it and have them fight to come up, but we're not doing that. So, no, but I agree with you. Affordability is important, and and we need to work on it. So,
Okay, Commissioner King?
Thank you, Vice Chair, for the history. It was very interesting, and the perspective, the kind of high-level perspective, and I also agree that we do need affordability, but I do understand that it's a challenge to get affordability through our land development code. We've already been through that many times. I feel like I've been through the meat grinder and trying to figure out how to get some affordability out of this code. I think it's almost impossible to do that in a meaningful way that's impactful. And if you look at the context, and I'm going to speak a little bit about our affordable housing work group that we have been working on, my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Aguirre and Commissioner Takau, we've been working on this because we all care. Everyone on this commission cares about affordability, and we're trying to drill down and bring back some ideas and suggestions that would help us address that as best we can through different strategies. So I'm not that hopeful that the code itself and the zoning will help us really materially change the affordability issue. It might help around the edges, the margins, but I don't think it's fundamentally going to help move the needle. And if you look at that in the context of the I-Team, which is part of the innovation office here in Austin, which I'm very happy that they're doing this analysis. It's really good that we have folks focused on a big issue like displacement. And their definition of displacement is being displaced when you don't want to be displaced. That's a pretty simple displacement. You're pushed out and you don't want to be pushed out. And by pushed out, different types of forces, affordability, all kinds of different issues that are there. And the numbers that they gave us they equate to about 511,000 people. Can you believe that? 511,000 people, over 165,000 households in Austin are at risk of displacement. And so I don't know what other tool we have to help us deal with that, except the land development code and the zoning. Therefore, I don't want to give up on trying to use that as our main tool to help address displacement, to help prevent displacement. And yes, I've heard, well, that's based on the current code. Well, then what I would like to know is how much displacement is anticipated based on this code. So that is my point. I hope, and I would ask that this commission consider recommending to council that they do that analysis, that they hire a company to go and do that analysis to see what is the impact, the anticipated impact on displacement based on this land development code. If we're having this displacement issue under the current code, what will it be like under the new code? So before we pull the lever, I would hope that we can get that analysis done by an independent third party to help us understand the impact and ideas and strategies to help that. And before I give up the mic to someone else, I'd just like to say that, I am concerned that the land development code will unintentionally facilitate displacement. I'm not trying to make it the bad guy or the monster here, nor folks who've worked on it. Because I understand, as I've already said, it's a very hard thing to do to get affordability, squeeze affordability out of this, particularly in the state of Texas where the legislature prohibits us from using certain tools that we could use. So we're very constrained. And that's my other point, is because we're constrained in these ways, we have to be very careful about how we do use the tool we have, the land development tool. And I would say that we should err on the side of being very deliberately judicious in how we apply the upzoning in our city and do it in a way that intentionally prevents displacement and certainly doesn't make it worse. So that's my main focus. I'm hopeful that we can at least get that analysis done, learn from that analysis, come back to the code and make whatever tweaks we have. My recommendation would be to go take it slow, to say if you want these additional entitlements, that you do have to provide community benefits, and that those community benefits be developed by the community in concert with the developers. Work together. Instead of saying, flip the switch, here's your entitlements, go forth and build. I would prefer to say, we're not going to flip the switch until you go through the process of working with the communities to address their needs for displacement prevention, address those needs, and development that works for them, that provides the housing that they want and need and can afford, and the services that they want and need for their community. So that would be my suggestion. I hope we can get some support to urge the council to at least do the displacement impact analysis on the code. And then going forward, what I would also ask is that every zoning case and development project that comes through, that there be a displacement impact statement associated with that. We have an affordability impact statement. Why not a displacement impact statement? We should have that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner King. Any other comments or questions? Then, and I want to say thank you very much, Vice Chair, for that. That was really interesting. I had no idea how to compare this code to other codes that have been mentioned. And also, in talking about increasing entitlements for affordability, it seems like if we already increase entitlements from single family to R4 to RM1, which increases from 1 unit to 4 to 6 units, you're already giving away the farm, and you're not going to have any incentives for affordable housing. That the way to do it is to keep it, and then if you want to incentivize affordable housing, then that's where you do it, and still have RM1 and R4, but have the affordable housing already tied into that. But that is just one person's opinion. But thank you very much. Very thought-provoking. Any other comments, or we can go on to, and I see Commissioner Aguirre looking at me.
No, I'm still processing the information that was just now presented. And some of it sort of makes sense as to what happened to East Austin. Because if we grew, I guess intentionally, and then if we had been little cities, then each little city would have had its own central core and own infrastructure, to support those residents that are in that area. And obviously, we don't have a lot of that in East Austin, especially in Southeast Austin. So now I can see how the growth that we did probably did not work best for several communities. And by that, I'm talking the east of I-35 communities. And that's somewhat distressing. And then realizing that if we're going to be creating more density, knowing that we don't have the infrastructure there right now to support the current residents, that's really going to make it challenging for those of us that are in that current situation right now. So I'm now more stressed than I was before.
I don't think Vice Chair Duncan wanted to do that to you. Then